Shalom, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Um, this is fun because I've known Sean basically for half his life, and he said he didn't mention that he was largely raised in Massapequa, and at the earlier part of this century, my Princeton Alumni Schools Committee chairwoman, former member of our congregation, assigned me to interview him for Princeton class of 2008. And at the time, he showed me some of his drawings and illustrations and book plates that reminded me sort of like of little icons. And
Mm.
I could see he really was a talented artist. He also told me about his interest in comics and other things. Anyway, he didn't get in, but he did go to work for the Metropolitan Museum. He continued to work and he got in the next year. So Sean did go to Princeton and he studied art and archaeology and he graduated in the class of 2009. And he did a few other things, but he always kept up with his art. So in 2017, he published his first book called Bolivar, which immediately won all kinds of acclaim, and the New York Public Library thought it was among the best children's books of 2017. But it's not just for children because it's a story about a dinosaur on the West Side named Bolivar, but everybody's too busy to notice him. And it's almost like a graphic novel, and in a way, in the mode of Thurber. Subsequently, he did Bolivar Eats New York. That was a sequel, and that's all kinds of things about New York City and places to eat and so on, at which he did. Then someone else wrote it. Then he did a book about astronaut Alan Bean, the astronaut who painted the moon, because astronaut Alan Bean went to the moon, but afterwards he painted it. You've got to read the book. Now, in 2021, he's already published one book about Passover, and another book is coming, and you can already buy it. It's called This Very Tree, and it's about the tree that survived 9/11 at the World Trade Center. But this is the book about Pesach, the Passover guest. And Sean illustrated it. He didn't write it. In fact, this is a repurposing totally of the famous story by Yud Lamed Peretz in Yiddish, which is a very short story, Die Kunzenmacher. In Hebrew, it's Ha'oseh Niflaot, which means exactly the same thing, the wonder worker or the miracle worker, about what happens on Erev Pesach in a poor family. But this is not a story about the shtetl. This is a story which is completely repurposed. And Sean's drawings are, as usual, really good. And not only that, but he in addition to the drawings in the book, he even does like the front, the back, the covers, but the frontispiece and the back. Same thing he did in the book about the astronaut who painted the moon, the little moon prints. So I'm very happy to introduce him. He's zooming in from Charlottesville, Virginia, where he lives with his wife, who's also a member of Princeton 9, and his two sons, who I presume are a good audience. And Sean, it's so nice to see you here. And everybody here reads, and everybody here likes books. So tell us about what's up and where you're going these days.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, David. That was quite the introduction. It's probably just about the nicest introduction I think I've ever gotten, and I'm not exaggerating. First of all, it's great to see you. I know we talked on the phone yesterday, but it's been a while. I was disappointed when I didn't get into the class of 2008, but as I like to say, I met my wife in the class of 2009, so kind of happy everything worked out for the best with that whole situation, which is I think a few million years ago at this point. But at any rate, yeah, I put together some slides, and I'm so happy to be here this morning. This is just a real treat. We were very excited about the reception that the Passover guest has gotten. And one of the real sort of fun things about this whole process in promoting the book is we've gotten to speak at a lot of temples and JCCs and sort of organizations that are about Jewish culture and Jewish life. And that's just been a lot of fun. So this is actually one of the last ones I'm doing because Pesach is so close. But I'm really hoping that you all enjoy what I put together. And, of course, always happy to answer any questions. So I'm going to go to share screen and it works. All right.
Great.
Okay, great. So I actually, sort of David alluded to, I started illustrating when I was pretty young. I wasn't in college yet. Actually, about 13 or 14, I was working on a series of books called Redwall by an author named Brian Jakes, who has sadly passed on about 10 years ago now. And I just kind of got into drawing when I was younger, like a lot of little kids, and I just kept going. But I didn't sort of study art formally in college. I was always drawing while I was in school, and I did take some studio painting courses, which were helpful. But I got out of I should say I graduated from Princeton, and I immediately wanted to start illustrating books. So it took a little while. But the first book I actually published that I wrote myself was this one, Bolivar, and it took me about 5 years to illustrate it. It's actually 224 pages long. So it was a bit of a slog, but like David said, it got a great reception. I'm so happy about that. It's about a dinosaur who lives on the Upper West Side, about 78th and Columbus, I think, and he lives there because he doesn't want anyone to notice him. He just wants to be a regular New Yorker. So I have some slides from, or I should say, some illustrations from that. It's one of my favorite illustrations from it, actually. Like most dinosaurs, Bolivar lived on corned beef sandwiches and tonic water, which he drank with lime. So this was an example of something I did where it's sort of based on an Ed Hopper illustration. But at any rate, you can see, as I was putting this presentation together, I immediately noticed so many of these illustrations have something to do with Jewish food. I don't really know why. It's not really intentional, but it just pops up in my books a lot. So if you notice that, that's why. It's another illustration from Bolivar. I don't know if anyone's been to West Sider Books. It's on Broadway and around 80th Street, but it's kind of based on that environment. The little girl's named Sybil. Sybil is the only person that notices Bolivar, and most of the book is about her trying to kind of convince her mother and her classmates that Bolivar exists when they're all kind of too busy or preoccupied to just think she's sort of making it up. There's another illustration from Bolivar, the one train. Back when you could do this. Actually, it's funny. Some of these illustrations, amazing. Pre-pandemic, looking at them, it just sort of take for granted a certain way of life. And now you look at it, it definitely seems to be before. Like this wouldn't be going on now. But had a lot of fun making this. This is kind of an homage to an illustration by a illustrator named Sophie Blackall. She got 2 Caldecott medals. And she had this great poster in the subway of all these different people sitting on subway benches. And I thought I had to put that in the book. So it's actually in the book. This is 3 2-page spreads, like 6 pages that just continue till you get to the main characters. And this is another one of the little girl, Sybil. So I also included some stuff here about Bolivar Eats New York, which David alluded to. This was a lot of fun to do, this book. It's about different kinds of food in New York City. And it kind of goes to all 5 boroughs. And it starts with, you find out the main character, Bolivar, because he only likes eating corned beef sandwiches. He hasn't really tried anything else. So his friend Sybil takes him to Flushing for Chinese food, to Staten Island for pizza. They go to the Bronx for Italian cookies and a lot of other things in between. One of the things is bagels, so sort of a Russ and Daughters appetizer stand-in. I really like this illustration. I actually used it in my portfolio. And I think egg creams, yes. It's funny, most of the work I've done about New York City, I actually did after I moved to Virginia. And it was kind of fun because I get to visit, if you will, in my mind when I'm working sometimes. Although most recently I've done books about DC, but the most recent, actually I should say, the most recent book I did was about Manhattan too, and I'll get to that towards the end of the presentation. So the second book that David mentioned was The Astronaut Who Painted the Moon, and this was for Scholastic, and sort of David has a couple of interesting Princeton connections that I'm going to touch on, but one of the big ones is I finished it right before my 9th reunion. And it was kind of a crazy time because I finished the book and then we like drove up from Virginia to New Jersey like the following day, and my wife forgave me later, but that was a fun project. Another interesting thing about it is that the commander of the mission that's featured in this book, it's Apollo 12, so it was the second manned mission to the moon, was actually Peter Conrad, who is a class of 1953, I want to say 52 or 53, but he was a Princeton graduate. And I kind of forgot that, and I remembered it in the course of doing the research for the book. And he'll show up on the next illustration. But this is an illustration of Alan Bean based on a famous photograph that Conrad took of him, where he was looking at some sort of a scientific data that they had gotten from a probe that actually had been, or a lander that had been sent to the moon ahead of the Apollo missions. And he was doing things like throwing rocks to see what they would do. It was very interesting. Something I learned when I was doing this book, when they were on the surface of the moon, they did not have a lot of time to goof around. I guess later that they people that landed played golf and were driving around the moon rover, but the first 2 or 3 missions were pretty short. So he was talking about how he had a checklist and he had to stick to it, and he barely even had any time to like gaze up and look at outer space. And of course, you could only see stars on the moon if the sun isn't directly on you. So this is a little bit of a cheat, but kind of like the effect, so went with it anyway. The art director said it was okay. And Alan Bean was a cool guy. That's who the book is about. He was a Navy commander who basically a test pilot. He grew up during World War II and was really interested in aviation. And then when he became old enough, he joined the Navy, became a test pilot, and was able to be admitted to the Apollo program. And he had an interesting reputation, actually. He was known to be a bit of a klutz, which is kind of funny because he was a very talented artist. And of course, you have to be very careful to be a good artist. And one of the things he did when he was on the moon is he accidentally like burned out the camera, the video camera they were supposed to be using, like almost the second he landed. And there's references to him in The Right Stuff as well. That's kind of like doing funny things, but he really liked to paint, and his paintings were really remarkable. And they kind of had this look to them where he wouldn't just paint outer space to look like it was black with like white stars or something. It would be purple or pink, and the stars would be all these different colors, and there'd be all these sort of weird effects and clouds. And it was kind of fun to look at his work and think about how he did things and incorporate it into some of the work I was doing. And what happened was, after he landed, this is kind of what it says in this illustration for those of you who have read it already. He realized that talking about his experience wasn't really sufficient to get anyone to understand what he had been through. And in a lot of ways, I don't know that you really can. You either have been to the moon or you haven't. But he thought that painting was actually a much better way of doing it than just looking at these sort of grainy, pictures that were taken on the cameras, the Hasselblads that they had. And so, David, I included this illustration. So I don't know if you could see it, but Pete Conrad, who's in the middle of the raft, is holding a Princeton flag. And he took 3 Princeton flags to the moon. Sadly, 2 of them were destroyed or something like that, one in a fire. But the Mudd Library, which is the university archive, still has 1 of them. So I actually called the archivist, and we had a 10-minute conversation to confirm that they were there. But all my books, sort of a matter of public record, all my books have some reference to Princeton. If you could find them, if you look for them, you'll see it. But something's very small. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about process with Bolivar, and then I'm going to talk about the Passover guest. But a lot of people ask me, how do you actually make these pictures? It takes me a while. It's kind of tricky, but these are the tools I use to actually make the drawings. The drawings are line art. It's pencil on paper, very simply, graphite. And I like to crosshatch, but I typically will use a mechanical pencil, which is the small black pencil you see in the middle. And then also for shading, I'll use a regular, what they call a wood case graphite pencil. Lately, I've actually been using more wood case pencils because I think the line is more interesting, but neither here nor there. So that's 2 pencils. I don't know if you could see there's 4 erasers. And sometimes I use a 5th eraser. So I use 2 pencils and 5 erasers, which is basically everything you need to know about me as an artist. I like to correct my mistakes, and I make quite a few of them as I go. There's also a T-square. I used to use my mom's T-square. I don't know what happened to it. So I had to buy another one. And then I have a couple of right angles that are good for figuring out where the page starts and stops, and artist tape, which is how you put the piece of paper on the drafting table. This is actually on my drafting table, which is why it's all smudgy. Okay, so this is a finished illustration from Bolivar. And again, I point out this is in Zabar's for those of you who recognize it. I actually created this years ago, this presentation, so it had nothing to do with Pesach or Jewish food or anything, and just showing up today, so it's kind of funny. But this was a finished illustration that's from Bolivar. It's in a environment that kind of looks like Zabar's, kind of looks like the markets. I used to live on the Upper West Side, so it was very sad when Fairway had to close. You'll see that the lines are sort of crosshatched pencil lines. There's color, there's words, there's balloons or speech balloons, we call them in comics. There's borders, and all these things are actually separate layers that are added on Photoshop. And I'm going to kind of show you how that happens. So this is what this looks like when it's a sketch. I love showing this sketch because it's a really messy sketch. That's a really good idea about, or it gives a really good sense about how I work when I put these types of things together. If you're looking carefully, you could see there's Scotch tape. I cut part of the picture and I sort of taped it down to another piece of paper. The outline is done in some Sharpie marker in order to kind of, delineate where the panels are and where the speech balloons are. And then for some reason the Post-it note saying what it is chapter 2, spread 14 is still on there. So kind of a funny mix of elements to kind of give you a sense of what this looks like in its very early stages. But all the elements are still there. I just can go back up. You could see the kid with the airplane and the gorilla doll, sort of a King Kong reference. All the different people, of course, the bagels and the challah and the teapots are on the ceiling, and then the food cases on the other side. So then this is the finished line art. When I actually make the pencil art and then scan it, this is what it looks like. It's scanned to the computer with something that looks like that. Just a big document scanner. I think my dad found it for me on eBay. Typically you have to get these used from a school or a business because you don't want to because they're quite dear. But anyway, he helps me a lot with this kind of stuff, which is great. But they're kind of unusual too. I only really know illustrators that have them, and a lot of my friends who are artists, if they need to scan something, I'll come over to my house to do it. So I'm kind of proud of this thing. But at any rate, this is what the line art looks like, and you can kind of see the cross hatching. That's, for those of you who don't know, is the intersecting lines kind of create texture and shading. And okay, so that's the scanner. It gets scanned in. It is colored on a what's called a graphics tablet. This is my old graphics tablet. I actually don't have a picture of my new one with somebody using it. So this is actually my oldest child many years ago, like 4 years ago now. He's 7 now. He's in 2nd grade, so he looks quite a bit different. He's actually younger than his brother at this point. At any rate, but what you do is exactly what he's doing, where there's a stylus, like a big plastic pencil, and you just kind of paint on it. it's similar for those who are familiar with the old like lithography or you know, 4-color process. What they used to do is they would do line art, and then you would paint something, and then you would print the black lines on a white piece of paper, and then on top of that you would print the sort of the 4-color process, or the other way around, you would do the 4-color process and then put the black ink on top of it. So we're kind of doing that with computers. It's just that it's all being put into one document and then sent to the publisher, who sends it to the printer. So kind of go through that process now. This is what the coloring looks like as you're starting. You kind of use what's called a gradient. You see it sort of goes from dark to light upward. It just gives a sense of space. And then start shading, or rather I should say putting color down. It's called flatting, or putting down local color. So I'll do that. And then you start adding in more details. So you could see some of the texture in the floor. You could see the fruit. It's called highlights, you know, light part and shadow. And again, like little details like the blush on the faces, and the art that's on the various food boxes and cans. And then I'll drop the line work on top of that. And then after that, you had the text, and you had the borders. I really enjoy lettering my own comics. Some people use fonts, or they have other people do it. I'm a bit of a maniac where I feel like I have to do everything myself. So I actually hand lettered all this, and I hand lettered all 224 pages of Bolivar. I did it twice because I didn't like it the first time I did it, and my wife also forgave me for that. When she figured out I was about halfway through doing it the second time, she was very concerned, but it was okay. I actually was really pleased with the results. I'm going to just go through that again, so, you know, if people like to see it. And so that's sort of an example of just kind of process with coloring things on a computer. All right, I just want to talk about research a bit. And for this, actually, it's going to be just about the Passover guest. So this is the book that I did with Susan Kucel, who's a synagogue librarian up in DC, and now a good friend of mine. We actually just met in the course of doing the book. And it was published by Neil Porter Books and Holiday House this past January. And just to give a bit of a background on the book, it is, like David said, it's an adaptation of The Magician by Peretz. It takes place in Washington, D.C. in the 1930s. And the reason for that is because our editor, Neil Porter, thought that if you really kind of wanted to give a sense of why these people would be so poor, putting it in a historical setting where poverty was a widespread problem made a lot of sense. And it was in DC because Susan lives in DC, and she really wanted to highlight the DC Jewish community, which to my knowledge, there are just not a lot of books about. I think this is one of the few. So that was kind of an interesting idea. I think in hindsight, it was actually a really smart move because putting a depression story in Washington, D.C. really makes the depression feel like it's happening like all over the country. And a lot of depression stories take place in New York City, which makes sense. You know, I think part of that even is a little like Little Orphan Annie type influence, but I happen to like that musical, and was kind of excited to do this project because I really like doing things from the 1930s. It's actually funny. My agent, Marietta Zacher, she asked me for a list of stories I was interested in doing. And on the list, I said I always wanted to do a story about like a Jewish family in the 30s. So she had this manuscript on her desk and she sent it to me. That's how I actually wound up illustrating it. So this was actually the case wrap. You take the dust jacket off the book, you'll see case wrap, and wanted to do the Passover meal. It was actually in the book, it would take place later, but kind of wanted to give a sense of what's happening kind of like, you know, during dinner. And again, more food. I'm going to show you even more food now. This is a spread from inside the book. When Muriel, who's the main character, goes into her parents' house, it's empty, and then the magician shows up, and you know, sort of everybody turns around to talk to him, and when they look back in their house, all of a sudden it looks like this. And this was a fascinating illustration to work on. I actually did it twice. The first one didn't work, and my editor, my art director, looked at it, and it just, the emphasis wasn't enough on the food. It was more on the people. I realized, hey, if we just kind of, cut off the adults, you could see their arms, so how they're gesturing. But the really important part is Muriel looking at the food, and it really got a chance to highlight the food in a sort of more dramatic way. So the author Susan is very proud of the fact that I actually used her plates for this illustration. And I don't actually know if there's anything from my family in here now that I'm looking at it. I don't think so. But it was fun. I got to revisit or learn better a number of different things. For example, doing stylized Hebrew lettering, which is never something I really did before. But I had to put it on the matzah, and of course the Haggadah, and then the Seder plate, and the Elijah cup is all there. And brisket, which of course Bolivar's favorite food is corned beef. So I'm not unfamiliar with drawing brisket, but we had to figure out a way of making brisket look super appetizing in a picture book. I think brisket is delicious, but it is kind of funny to draw pictures of it. It doesn't always look that great when you're drawing it. So we put a little parsley on it. And we had a lot of fantastic arguments about exactly what should be on the Seder plate and what the order should be. And I think we actually went with the PJ Library received order, because this became a PJ Library book just this year, actually. For those who don't know, PJ is a program that sends picture books to people who are raising Jewish children. And so they're a great group of people, great organization. Actually, they took me to Israel with about 20 other authors and illustrators about 2 years ago, when one could still do such a thing. All right, so here's a couple of research pieces from the Passover guest. One of the things I really like about illustrating and writing, for that matter, is doing research. It was a lot of fun, and actually a lot of work to do research for this book, because it takes place in the 30s in DC, and there was a sense that we had to get it right. It had to, like the city, it had to look like the time period, and then it also had to look like how people would look in the Depression, how they would be dressed, what they would be doing. So in this case, I went to DC, the FDR Memorial, and this is the George Segal sculpture called Breadline, which I know is very famous. And this kind of became an inspiration for the men on line waiting for soup in Hooverville. And something interesting I learned, there was a Hooverville in DC on near the mall. It wasn't actually with the cherry blossoms, but when you're doing historical fiction or even nonfiction picture books, you could make things up so long as you apologize for it in the illustrator or author's note. So if you say, I know this is basically what happened with the Passover guest, is Susan wrote, we know that there was no Hooverville among the cherry blossoms, but we thought that the contrast of spring and what was going on during the Depression was really important. And I actually finished this book up around this time last year. And the reason I bring that up is because it was when the pandemic was starting, and I was thinking about Pesach, and I was thinking about just the fact that spring was coming, even though everything was just so crazy and nobody knew what was going to happen next. And the trees were started blooming. I mean, especially in Charlottesville, being a New Yorker, I think they bloom early, but the trees were blooming seemingly early. And I thought, gee whiz, these trees have a lot of nerve, blooming and looking so beautiful when everyone is so miserable and scared. And then I kind of realized, these trees have been doing this all the time. They've always done this. They bloomed through the entire 20th century, and before that, thousands, millions, years even. And it just kind of really struck me, and it kind of went into this book, and went into the next book I did, which I'll show you towards the end of the presentation. But it became a really powerful sort of symbol for me, just the idea of flowers and flowering trees, regardless of what's happening to us. Just this idea that nature is continuing. And I think many people would point out sort of also how do I put it? an indicator of the faithfulness of God, and just, you know, the persistence of certain things despite our individual experiences. All the bad stuff happens, trees still bloom. So that became an encouragement to me. This is another statue from George Segal called Rural Couple. This is not a rural couple next to them. This is Muriel, who's the protagonist's parents, who are they only had the 2 candles. They didn't have enough wine for Elijah's cup, is what Susan says in the book. So we're trying to figure out how to draw that, but the Depression era couple, they just seem like a really kind of good reference point to start when doing Muriel's parents. So that became an inspiration too. Actually, I think Muriel's father looks a bit like my Uncle Sonny, now that I think about it. I have to ask my parents if they agree. This is another example of something that was kind of interesting to learn. I'm actually the next one, yeah. So I'll go back, but this is a Pete Souza photograph. He's a presidential photographer that worked during the Obama administration. And the Lincoln Memorial gets this wonderful copper color, I think typically around sunrise, so early in the morning. The book takes place during sunset, of course, or Pesach, but this is a moment in the book where Muriel is putting a penny in the hat of the magician. That's the only penny she has. So I was trying to think about ways in which you could kind of make the whole scene merge together. So of course, Lincoln is on the penny. The penny is made of copper. So the background of this illustration became this sort of copper orange color. And then you could see a little green shading, almost like Lincoln is oxidizing. Of course, that doesn't really make any sense, but you know, it's a painting, so we'll get away with it. Someone else pointed out, and I thought this was a really, really fascinating observation, of course, with both Pesach and also with Lincoln, the themes of emancipation are very important. So Lincoln kind of pops up a couple of times in the book. At the very end, the penny is there. The magician actually returns the penny. He leaves it with Muriel after he leaves and drinks the wine, because of course he's Elijah. But kind of wanted to really kind of emphasize Lincoln, I think for a couple of different reasons. That was one of them. So this is kind of like the whole illustration is a penny. And people ask me, oh, where'd you get the idea? Seriously, the art director's like, why is it orange? Like, well, the penny, but also it's like the Lincoln Memorial looks orange. You'd be surprised how buildings sort of change colors. Similar thing with the outside, it could look very blue. So what I wound up doing was I'm going to go back to that, but taking that blue color and then putting it against a dusk sky. And of course, there's Lincoln again. And it looks kind of otherworldly, but in reality, it's just taking some things that are already there and just, you know, ratcheting them up. You know, the blue is a little bit bluer, the yellow is a little bit yellower, but it's not totally fantastic. This is kind of fun. This is the author, Susan. We did a photo shoot and video shoot for a Instagram takeover for our publisher. And let me just do this. So at any rate, that gives you a sense of like trying to get these different like places in the book referencing real places. Similar thing here. This is actually a street. I believe it's either Avenue I or 6 in DC. I don't remember exactly where now, but it's actually a line of condemned buildings that are right by the historic Sixth Sinai synagogue. And it's great because for me, I wanted to kind of draw some townhouses from the Depression. I didn't necessarily want to use people's actual houses because I lack of a better way of putting it, I didn't want to insult anybody. I didn't have to. Nobody lives here, and they look like they're from the 30s. So kind of lucked out. Now, as you might have noticed, a number of the paintings that I showed you kind of have a sort of a Marc Chagall kind of look. And that's intentional. Chagall actually illustrated one of the Yiddish editions of Peretz's story. Very strange illustrations where everyone was sort of floating in almost every picture, and all black and white, so no color. But I love Chagall. I had a poster of this in my room when I was growing up. I got it at MoMA, of course. And I love his colors. I love how he uses geometry, sort of breaks things down and puts things together. He sort of famously didn't like Cubists very much, but I think he took the best of what Cubists were doing and kind of applied it to his own work. Little things like just Eye in the Village, where you could see the circle of the man's face, you know, the cheek by the lip, kind of continuing with the circle that goes around the horse. I love things like that, like continuity of shapes and forms. And so you'll see a little bit of that in my work generally, but especially in the Passover Guest, I decided to just kind of go full Chagall with some of the illustrations. So this is an example. We're sort of taking these colors, the reds, the greens, and blues, which are not colors that a lot of people will put in the same illustrations or in the same paintings even. For it's just, you know, not done, but you get these really beautiful effects. So I like doing that with this project. And then that's Sixth Eye Synagogue. This is now a sort of a community center. They do a lot of really interesting events and book launches, actually. Although not children's books, unfortunately. We asked them if they'd be interested in hosting something for us, and they said they just don't do children's books. But we did spend some time inside before the pandemic, and I took a bunch of pictures. And the synagogue is referenced a couple of times in the book. It was actually in the center of a pretty vibrant Jewish community in DC during the 30s. There were a number of synagogues at the time, but I think this was one of the bigger ones. The stained glass window, which is in front there, the Star of David, you see, sort of shows up in this illustration. And Muriel is running to get the rabbi to kind of check on the food to make sure it's not a black magic thing, as you say, sorcery. He says, no, it's sorcery. Sorcery is an illusion, but if it's a miracle, you could actually eat the food. So that's why it's okay to eat it later. I put the stained glass window up top, and we had a lot of fun with this. Actually, when we went to do a walk through DC, my wife held the book up so I could take a picture of it so it could kind of line up. But then later on, Susan actually went back at night. You could see I think it's probably even a better photograph in some ways to kind of get a sense of the way the stained glass window kind of shows up in the book. So this book was just a lot of fun for me. Again, I'm so pleased with the response it's gotten. I think it really kind of struck a chord with a lot of people. A lot of our reviews said it was timely, which, I mean, frankly, I wish it weren't timely. It's timely because of financial uncertainty and just, plagues being in the news, frankly. But it also, I think it's a really sort of beautiful story. I think Susan did a wonderful job with it. And hoping it becomes, a regular fixture for a lot of people, their families, to read around Pesach. So I know we're doing it. And my boys have actually become even more interested in the holiday. Of course, we celebrate it every year, but having the picture book with everything kind of in it has kind of made them sort of start asking more questions and more curious about celebrating it this year. So that's been a lot of fun to see. All right, so then the last thing I'm going to do is talk about my next book, which is called This Very Tree. This was a fascinating project for me because it was not my idea. I wrote it, but it wasn't my idea. And what happened was my agent and my editor, Christian Trimmer, contacted me and say, hey, we would really like a book about the survivor tree. The survivor tree was a calorie pear tree that was present in Ground Zero during 9/11. And what happened was it was buried under rubble after the towers collapsed. And sometime in October, it was rediscovered and it was miraculously, I'm not using that word, rhetorically, miraculously, it was still alive. And the people that dug it up, it became very important to them because they found so few living things under that pile that they did find this tree. And in a lot of ways, well, not in a lot of ways, it was the last living thing to be pulled from the pile. And they decided that they really wanted to try to keep it alive. So it was sent to the Arthur Ross Nursery in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, and it was replanted. We put under the care of arborist named Richie Cabo and some other people, and they weren't sure if it was going to make it past the first winter, but it did, and it regrew a bunch of branches, and eventually was replanted at the memorial about around the 10-year anniversary. So it's been there around 10 years now, and they asked me to do this for a couple of reasons. I think one, because they know I like doing New York stories, which is very true. What they didn't know at the time was that my wife is actually, she's a clinical psychologist who has a specialization in trauma therapy, and particularly doing certain kinds of talk therapy with people who've experienced traumatic events in order to get them to be able to move past it in a productive way. Trauma therapy, it's very different from the way it's depicted in movies, as is the case with most psychology. I'm sure plenty of people on this meeting know a lot about this, but at any rate, what wound up happening was Lucy and I sat down, and I asked her, if the tree were a patient, excuse me, if the tree were a patient that came into your office after 9/11, and it had all these injuries and was feeling down, didn't know what was going to happen, what would you expect the tree to say? And what would you say to the tree? And then what would you expect the prognosis to be? Like, what would be its course, so to speak? And so she sat down with me, and we scratched out on like two or three Post-it notes, like an entire story arc for this tree. And that really became the book. The book was kind of, trying to see 9/11 and its aftermath through the perspective of this tree. But the tree is also responding to these things the way a human would respond. The reason why this was sort of for me an amazing opportunity, and why I really wanted to do this book, is because we definitely had been struggling with how to describe what had happened in 9/11 to our children. I know a lot of people are, children and grandchildren. It's not very straightforward. It's one of those things like, how do you explain this? The tree is kind of a good proxy for a person. And trees live about it. This particular tree lived about 80 years. It has limbs, it has skin. It gets hurt, it heals. It experiences trauma. It can heal from the trauma. So that was really the motivation. It was being able to find a way to tell a story about 9/11, what happened afterwards, to kids that felt appropriate for where they are. So the other reason I was really attracted to this project is because I am a huge E.B. White fan. And E.B. White, the writer who wrote for The New Yorker, and of course Charlotte's Web is most famous for, probably. But he wrote a great essay called Here is New York, which was circulated a lot during the time after 9/11, particularly because of this quote where he makes a reference to this tree that I think was in Turtle Bay, somewhere in the East 40s, as a metaphor for the city. But he said, when I look at it nowadays and I feel a cold shadow of the plains, I think this must be saved, this particular thing, this very tree. And the cold shadow of the plains, of course, is Soviet bombers, after they were concerned about Nazi bombers, because I remember when I was a kid that the windows of the Rose reading room in the New York City Public Library were still blacked out because they hadn't gotten around to fixing that since the 40s and 50s. But when people looked at this essay later, they immediately saw 9/11 in it, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I sent this to my editor, and he wrote back to me, okay, the name of the book is This Very Tree. So this actually became the title page. This is the first page of the book. You open it up, you turn the end papers, you just see this. And this just means so much to me. E.B. White is undoubtedly my favorite writer. Just a great essayist, and of course, wrote children's literature. And this is my favorite essay of his. And of course, I was never going to be able to illustrate an E.B. White book. They're all either illustrated or they don't need illustrations. And so just to have a quote of his in a book that I wrote, where it kind of fits in, was just the closest I'll ever get to actually working with E.B. White, I guess you could say. So I was really excited about that. And I included just a couple of illustrations from this book. It comes out on May 11th. This is the first illustration. More research. I had to figure out what Lower Manhattan looked like around 1970. I was not there for that. I was born in 1986. This illustration took something like 20 photographs to figure out. I still think one or two things are wrong because I could not figure out what exactly was in a particular place. But I did my best. And a lot of these buildings are still there. Some of them are changed considerably. That golden statue of is it energy or telecommunications is now in Texas, actually. I think AT&T got it. So they took it down. I think they even took the pyramid off. I don't even know why. But it was just little things like that where it was kind of interesting to learn about all these, the way that, I mean, you know, New York is always changing. My mom's friend's father used to say it would be a great city if they ever finished it. So it's kind of a lot of that going on. And of course, the Waldorf, not the Waldorf, the Woolworth Tower is in the back there. But it's amazing to think too, for me anyways, that none of this is there anymore. This is Arthur Tubman Plaza. The Sphere, they've moved to Battery Park, I think. Everything else I think was destroyed. And then you could see the tree kind of, you know, it's the lighter green. I included two illustrations that I actually included in the pitch for this book, and they're still some of my favorites. So this is the idea of a tree being under the rubble and being dug out. You know, I do comics, so it made sense to me to include panels in this book. Panels are just breaking up the page into sort of, you know, subdivisions to be able to tell a part of the story in sequence. So here you have, you know, the top of the pile is getting closer and closer to the bottom, you know, because they're clearing things away. And it was weeks before they found me. But I wanted to also put a whole illustration. This is another one from that book. I became very interested in just the different parallels and analogies that were happening during the 10 years that the tree was regrowing, particularly that as it was growing, One World Trade Center was being constructed. And of course, you know, a tree growing and a building growing, they kind of have some similarities. The same thing with the person growing. I got a note back from the fact checker saying that my chronology was wrong because the One World Trade Center was unfinished when the tree was replanted in the memorial. So like I said, you could do anything in one of these books so long as you apologize for it in the author's note. So we had a reference to the fact that the chronology was wrong. I said, you know, the tower was finished much quicker in this book, which was an outcome I think a lot of New Yorkers would have preferred. And it was just, I remember I had graduated college already, and we're still going down to the park and looking at the tower being put up, and it was remarkable to watch it actually. I actually lived on 96th Street at the time. I'd started living in Manhattan in 80th, and then I moved to 96th, and the building on 96th in Broadway had this really fantastic roof deck. It was the tallest building for probably about 15 blocks in every direction. And so you could just see clear to downtown, and you could actually see clear to them putting up the tower. So we would kind of watch and track it. It was right around when they were finishing it, like 2011 to 2012. So it was interesting to actually revisit all that by drawing it. And I think this is the last one. And then this is when the tree returns to Lower Manhattan. And you know, it is interesting. It's also the difference in thinking between how we create public space in the 60s and 70s versus now. I'm going to go back what the plaza looked like before. And now this is what that area looks like. And it's filled with white swamp oaks. And the only tree that is, or I should say, the only tree that isn't a white swamp oak is actually the survivor tree, which is a Callery pear. So it is planted kind of close to one of the memorial pools, and it has like a silver guardrail around it. And a lot of people use it to lay flowers or teddy bears or, you know, fireman hats, that kind of thing. firefighter hats, I should say. It was, yeah, it was, like I said, it was an interesting project. I was really very happy to do it, even though it was very hard at times. I actually wound up writing and illustrating this almost entirely last March, April, and May. So really in the thick of the like peak pandemic, I guess you could say. And I think some of that kind of comes out, again, the flowering trees and thinking about, you know, the future and hope, and kind of having, you know, resting on the fact that spring would come around again, which of course it has. In Virginia, it's already here. And, you know, looking forward to Pesach this year and also just better times. I think we're very close to normalcy right now, which is great. And I think that is, yeah, that's all I have in terms of formal stuff. And I would love to answer any questions. I talked for a little bit longer than I thought I was going to. So apologize if it was too long for anybody, but there you have it.
Can you unshare your screen so we
Yes.
can all see everybody?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so anybody have any questions besides me?
Okay. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, David. And can you have your first question from
Okay.
Karen?
Okay, so I love the astronaut book, and I did a little research after hearing and looking at it, and Alan Beam was quite some artist. And so some of your pictures kind of resembled to a certain degree. Was there an influence?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And my other question is, I know he passed away in 2018. Did you have a chance to meet or speak with him at all before he passed about this book?
Yeah, it's great questions. The answer to the first one is yes, absolutely. I mean, the point of the book was sort of to recreate some of his artwork, but in the context of where it came from. So I would have let me see, give me one second. I should just keep a pile of books, you know, by my podcasting station here, but I don't. So this is a really prime example of it. So this is a painting actually that I did based on one of his paintings. But this is my illustration. And in fact, everything in the book is my illustration. I just would sometimes kind of mimic compositions he did. But that's one. And then that's actually within the story, that's them on the moon. And then later, you'll see he's kind of setting up a model of the same scene. And then after that, you'll see he's sort of painting it.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And the cool thing from a little efficiency standpoint is, like I showed you, I had the colors like going over the line art for Bolivar. It was the same thing with this book. So what I actually got to do is I would sample out parts of an illustration, then reincorporate them into another illustration. For one thing, it made the project go a little bit faster than usual because I wasn't having to fill every page with sort of brand new work every time I sat down to do it. But it also kind of gave it a certain amount of like continuity. So you would see the same sort of images recur over and over and over again. So like you could see over here, over Sally Ride and Buzz Aldrin is the same painting, or at least part of it. So I got to make an asset, is what you call it, and I got to use it 3 times. And then this is actually back matter where you could see his paintings and photographs, kind of the compare. That's his work. Yeah. But I sadly, I never got to speak to him. The reason why is I had just finished the book, or I almost finished the book. And the plan was to finish the artwork and then to basically let him see it and then call him and talk to him. And I was looking forward to this. It was like an incentive, you know? I mean,
Sure.
And he passed away like a week before that was supposed to happen.
Oh.
So it was a real disappointment. Actually, I mean, seriously, it's one of the like considerable disappointments of my career. Because I was so looking forward to that. I was looking forward to having my kids talk to him. I was also looking forward to talking about art with an Apollo astronaut, and it just never happened. So, yeah.
Definitely.
I don't want to interrupt, except first of all, it's 1 o'clock, and more. nobody is on. Could you unmute everyone? Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question?
I think David.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question or two. And Sean, I thought your description of your process was fascinating. But
Thank you.
one of the questions I had, because I've looked at all your books, is just, and you mentioned that you like Little Orphan Annie. How come just about all of your characters don't seem to have eyeballs?
Yeah, I know, right?
I noticed that in Passover Guest, the parents do, but most of the time your characters don't have eyeballs. How come?
Well, it's funny with Passover Guest, Neil Porter, the editor, got on the phone with me. He's like, Sean, you're going to need to draw eyes. And it's less Harold Gray, who of course did Annie, and more Bill Watterson, who did Calvin and Hobbes. I think he kind of got in there with me a little bit, and I kind of, because he did eyes like that too. It's really, I like doing really expressive cartooning when I do cartooning. And the fewer things you have on a face, the easier it is to move things around. So the eyes could go up, they could go down. If it's just eyes and eyebrows, and if the eyes are just circles, they're kind of reduced to their essence, right? Just a circle in a particular spot. They're kind of easier to work with, at least for me. I have, as you can see, very detailed, in a lot of ways, heavy backgrounds. I'm huge on texture, sort of sometimes muddy types of color. So to have a person or an animal in the middle of that, who's just very light and who you could immediately read what they're thinking and feeling within this sort of much heavier, weighted down environment. It makes a lot of sense to me. Some people don't like it, and I completely understand that. There's a lot of art styles that I don't care for. And sometimes I'll see this, somebody will say, I like this book, but the characters all have dots for eyes. What is this, But that's kind of where it comes from. It was just sort of trying to create like a simple way of expressing emotion for a character in the middle of a very kind of complicated, environment.
Terrific. Is there anybody else who has a question? I have one question though. Does your authors have to approve of you as, I don't mean in a personal way, but that you are conveying how does that work with an author and a illustrator? That it appears I was under the impression that you didn't choose the illustrator. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point.
I don't mean you didn't. I don't mean they did. They didn't.
Yeah.
Choose that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah. The way it works is editor and to some extent art director choose the illustrator. In publishing, particularly in children's publishing, the creative director on a book is really the editor. So the editor takes the manuscript, and the way you could kind of describe it, it's like a director or producer in a movie. The person who wrote the screenplay, in Hollywood, the person who wrote the screenplay is often immediately thrown out a window. I think literally, but in publishing, the person who writes a picture book manuscript is kind of told, hey, we'll get back to you in 6 months. But they will often ask the person if they have an opinion or if they have any strong objections. And it also depends on the relationship between the editor and the writer. In this case, Neil's a great editor. He's one of the most respected editors working today in children's lit. He actually has a very good relationship with the author, Susan. So he did talk to her about what he was doing, but he certainly didn't have to, and there was no expectation of it. I don't know that there was any, for example, when Dean found out that I was illustrating The Astronaut Who Painted the Moon, I think they just said, hey, this is the guy illustrating. And I think that the relationship there may have been a little bit different. So it makes sense, honestly. Illustrating and writing a book are pretty different activities. I mean, even to the point of where, as a writer, by the time I start illustrating it, they say fire the writer, meaning don't think like a writer anymore. Don't try to rewrite as you're going. Sometimes I will, but it's you have to be very careful about that, because you then wind up into this process where you're just really spinning your wheels or eating your own tail, as they say. So yeah.
Okay, thank, and okay. Does anyone have any? I have a lot of questions. I'll send them to you because I don't. I have to go, and but I do have some questions. Does anyone else though? So I'm not going to hog the. We have a wonderful time. I think that was superb, and
Thank you.
if you have some time, maybe after the. Well, you've already talked to us about the next book, but are you already at work at the book after that?
I'd be happy to come back.
Please come back. Okay. Thank you so much. And everybody.
Thank you for having me.
It was a real treat. Thank you.
It was a very special occasion. And we thank David. We thank you and hope to see everybody. Please let me know next week. As I said, it's going to be an outdoor event. Short of rain. So if you want to come in from Charlottesville, you can stay with us. So thank you very much, Sean. Okay. Goodbye, everybody. And
thank you, Sean. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Passover.
Aziz